In today's video, we uncover the 6 most stupid ways Karens died, from a Karen climbing onto rooftop furniture during an argument to a Karen stepping into traffic and grabbing at a moving car, which gave her instant karma in the wildest way possible. It was June 28, 2018, in Tucson, Arizona. By midday, the temperature had reached 104 degrees. And desert wildlife was active. Longtime residents knew that rattlesnakes moved through the subdivision walls and drainage corridors during the summer, and that the safest response was distance. Roxanne Gillis, 46, had lived in the neighborhood for 3 years and served on the Homeowners Association board. She was known for escalating minor issues to city departments and demanding immediate corrective action. Over the previous year, she had contacted animal control twice about snakes near the common area, insisting they be removed. Each time she was informed that snakes on private or undeveloped land were not under city jurisdiction, and that residents were advised to leave them alone. She viewed those explanations as inadequate and dismissive. In the weeks leading up to the incident, she had also raised concerns during HOA discussions about reducing spending on outside contractors, including wildlife relocation services. That afternoon, during her usual midday walk, a neighbor spotted a diamondback rattlesnake coiled at the base of a block wall along a shared pathway. The neighbor stepped back and began calling a licensed wildlife relocator. Roxanne arrived moments later and pushed past the small cluster of neighbors to get a clearer look. Despite being told repeatedly to stay back, she stepped closer to the wall and leaned forward, studying the snake with the same measured focus she used during Homeowners Association inspections. She waved off the suggestion to wait for a professional and positioned herself between the snake and the others, effectively taking control of the scene. She indicated that she had handled situations like this before and that it did not require outside help. She had no gloves, no tools, and no protective equipment. When someone pointed that out, she crouched anyway, lowering herself to within a few feet of the coiled rattlesnake. The snake remained tight and elevated, its head angled toward her movement. The snake began to rattle as she extended her hand toward its tail. Several neighbors backed away and told her to stop. She hesitated only briefly, then leaned in again and reached closer. The rattlesnake struck forward in a rapid arc and bit her right hand between the thumb and index finger. Roxanne stood abruptly and stepped backward. 2 puncture wounds were immediately visible. The neighbor called 911 without delay. Paramedics arrived approximately 20 minutes later. During transport, her hand began swelling rapidly, and she reported increasing pain and dizziness. At the hospital, physicians administered anti-venom and admitted her to intensive care for monitoring. Laboratory tests revealed significant disruption to her blood's clotting function, a known complication of rattlesnake envenomation. Despite additional anti-venom and aggressive supportive treatment, she developed internal bleeding overnight. Her condition deteriorated steadily. Blood pressure levels fell to critical readings, and efforts to stabilize her were unsuccessful. Roxanne Gillis was pronounced dead the following morning. An autopsy determined the cause of death to be complications of rattlesnake envenomation. In the weeks that followed, the Homeowners Association circulated guidance reminding residents not to approach or attempt to relocate wildlife and to contact licensed professionals instead. The neighbor, who had initially called for help, provided a statement confirming that Roxanne had ignored repeated warnings to keep her distance. The snake was later located by a contracted wildlife relocator and removed from the area without further incident. It was July 14, 2017, in Chicago, Illinois. The rooftop bar sat on the 9th floor of a converted warehouse in the West Loop with a wraparound terrace and waist-high glass barrier pan framed in black steel. Melissa Corin, 34, was a marketing consultant. She was particular about her image and quick to argue when she felt a rule was being applied to her unnecessarily. People who knew her described her as someone who needed to feel ahead of things, ahead of trends, ahead of other people. A former colleague once said, Melissa had a way of deciding in advance that she was the exception to whatever was being asked of her. She arrived that evening with a friend. The two of them had talked about visiting the bar for almost a year. passing the idea back and forth until they finally picked a date. It had been on both of their lists for a long time, and Melissa wanted a photo that did the view justice. She ordered drinks at the outdoor bar and spent the first 20 minutes circling the terrace. She repeatedly rejected angles that didn't frame the skyline the way she wanted. Each attempt seemed to frustrate her more. She repositioned chairs, stepped into walkways, and asked her friend to retake the photo several times. Nearby guests began glancing over as her voice carried across the terrace. Small signs posted near the entrance and along the perimeter stated that guests were not permitted to lean over the railing or stand on furniture. Melissa eventually settled on the northwest corner, where the skyline framing was cleanest. She leaned her phone over the top of the barrier to get the height in the shot. A staff member approached and asked her not to lean over the barrier, explaining it was a safety policy. Melissa responded loudly enough for people at neighboring tables to hear, arguing that the glass reached her waist and that she wasn't doing anything unsafe. He asked her to step back. She shook her head and turned toward the skyline again. When he stepped away briefly, she climbed onto a cushioned bench near the corner. The added height dropped the barrier to mid-thigh, leaving open air above it. Her friend, standing a few feet away, told her to get down. A couple seated near the railing looked over as Melissa waved a hand dismissively and continued adjusting her stance. The staff member returned and instructed her to step off the bench immediately. Melissa replied that she was almost done and held up one finger without looking at him. He repeated the instruction. She turned slightly toward him, saying the bar was being overly cautious, and as she gestured backward with her right arm, her heel pressed deeper into the cushion behind her. The cushion shifted under her weight. Her left foot slid and her upper body tipped forward. By the time she reached for the top rail, she was already too far over the edge to recover. She went over the barrier and fell from the 9th floor terrace to the alley below. Emergency services arrived within minutes. She was transported to a nearby hospital with injuries that were not survivable. She was pronounced dead that evening. An autopsy later determined the cause of death to be multiple blunt force injuries sustained in the fall. The manner of death was ruled accidental. Her friend was treated on scene for shock. The staff member, who had twice asked Melissa to step down, gave a statement to responding officers. The bar closed the rooftop terrace for the remainder of the week. Following the incident, the ownership group removed the bench seating from the perimeter zone entirely and installed secondary cable barriers set 18 inches inward from the glass panel. Staff were given updated guidance on escalating safety interventions to management rather than continuing one-on-one conversations when a guest refused to comply. It was March 3rd, 2016, in Memphis, Tennessee. The early afternoon was clear and cold, with temperatures in the low 40s and a wind coming off the river. Downtown streets were busy with a steady mix of locals and visitors on weekends. Olivia Fitch, 43, was a customer service supervisor at a call center outside Memphis. Her co-workers described her as difficult to redirect once she had made up her mind about something, and quick to interpret any challenge to her judgment as disrespect. She had driven downtown that afternoon with her teenage daughter for lunch and a walk along the riverfront. While returning to her car in a nearby surface parking lot, she realized her phone was no longer in her purse. She retraced her steps mentally and became certain she had left it at the restaurant 2 blocks away. She called it from her daughter's phone. It rang, and then someone answered briefly before hanging up. She concluded immediately that someone had stolen it and muttered that people had no respect anymore, adding that she wasn't about to let someone just take her property. She opened a tracking app on her daughter's phone and saw the location indicator moving steadily along a nearby road, consistent with slow vehicle traffic. Rather than calling the police, Olivia decided she would handle it herself. She told her daughter to stay near the car and not move. She moved quickly toward the road, eyes fixed on the moving location indicator. The tracking app showed the phone continuing north at a steady pace, consistent with slow-moving vehicle traffic. A rideshare vehicle that had been sitting at a light near the parking lot exit began pulling forward, accelerating gradually as it merged into the lane. Olivia had spotted someone in the back seat holding a phone and had already decided that it was hers. She stepped off the curb and moved alongside the passenger side as the vehicle began accelerating through slow traffic. Drivers behind the rideshare tapped their brakes, unsure why a woman was moving into the lane. Olivia shouted toward the rear window, insisting the phone was hers. As the car reached approximately 15 miles per hour, she grabbed the rear door handle with one hand and struck the side of the vehicle with the other, demanding the passenger open the door. She reached toward the partially lowered rear window and thrust her arm inside, attempting to grab the phone directly. The driver, startled by the sudden movement alongside the vehicle, braked hard. Olivia had no stable footing and had not secured her grip on the doorframe. The abrupt stop threw her backward. Her hand slipped free, and she fell onto the road surface, striking the back of her head against the asphalt. The impact caused pedestrians on the sidewalk to turn immediately. The vehicle came to a stop, and the driver and passenger exited as traffic behind them halted. The passenger, a college student, had found the phone on the sidewalk outside the restaurant and had been attempting to identify the owner when the call came through. He exited the vehicle holding the phone in plain view and later gave a statement to police. Bystanders on the sidewalk called 911. Olivia was on the ground and not moving. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes. Olivia sustained a severe traumatic brain injury and never regained consciousness. She was transported to a hospital and died later that evening. An autopsy determined the cause of death to be blunt force traumatic brain injury resulting from the fall. The manner of death was ruled accidental. Her 15-year-old daughter was released to a family member. The passenger returned the phone and cooperated with investigators. No charges were filed. It was July 22, 2017, in Atlanta, Georgia. The Saturday morning traffic on the interstate was moving steadily at approximately 60 miles per hour. A gas station sat just off the exit ramp, separated from the main lanes by a short stretch of service road that fed directly into the merge lane. Michelle Okafor, 44, was a property manager for a residential complex in DeKalb County. People who worked with her described her as someone who found standard procedures deeply frustrating. She had a particular difficulty accepting that rules applied to her the same way they applied to everyone else, and she had a habit of framing every pushback she received as a personal attack rather than a standard response. That pattern extended beyond work. When inconveniences disrupted her schedule, she often chose the quickest visible solution rather than the one being recommended to her. That morning, she was already running behind after an earlier delay and was irritated by anything that threatened to slow her down further. She took the next exit and pulled onto the shoulder of the off-ramp after her tire pressure warning light came on. Roadside assistance quoted her a 45-minute wait. She told the operator she didn't have that kind of time and ended the call before the explanation was finished. She stepped out, pressed the sidewall with her thumb, nudged it with her foot. It felt firm. The light had come on before. She dismissed it as another faulty sensor, locked the car, and walked toward the gas station instead. Inside, she moved quickly through the aisles, knocking a small display of bottled drinks with her elbow and leaving them scattered on the floor without stopping. She grabbed 2 items and walked directly to the front of the store, stepping around the 4 people already waiting in line. She placed her items on the counter, despite being told to wait. When another customer objected, she dismissed him and kept her position at the register. A loss prevention officer approached and instructed her to step back and wait her turn. She challenged his authority and remained at the counter. After he identified himself and repeated the instruction, she refused to move and continued insisting on immediate service. The officer warned that she would be asked to leave if she did not comply. She stayed in place, escalating the exchange as other customers watched. The cashier ultimately processed the transaction to end the confrontation. Michelle collected her items and exited the store, still visibly agitated. She exited the store, still visibly agitated, continuing her complaint as the doors closed behind her. She paused near the entrance, turned back briefly toward the glass, then stepped into the parking lot and pulled out her phone. She began typing her complaint as she walked, eyes fixed on the screen. Without slowing, she crossed the parking lot and continued editing the message as she approached the service road. The slight curve of the exit ramp and vehicles stopped along the shoulder limited her view of approaching traffic. Still focused on her phone, she stepped off the edge of the service road and into the active merge lane without looking up. The driver saw her too late and braked hard, but there was no meaningful stopping distance. The vehicle struck her before he could avoid it. She was knocked forward and came to rest near the right lane line. Paramedics arrived within minutes. Michelle was unresponsive with signs of severe trauma. She was transported to a hospital and died in the trauma unit 4 hours later. The medical examiner listed blunt force trauma as cause of death. The driver was not charged. The interstate closed for 2 hours for investigation. Investigators later obtained a statement from the store's loss prevention officer to establish Michelle's movements prior to the crash. It was October 19, 2019, in Santa Rosa, California. A fast-moving wildfire driven by strong Diablo winds had broken out in the hills northeast of the city the previous evening. By early morning, mandatory evacuation orders had been issued for several neighborhoods. Patricia Wentz, 57, was a retired school administrator who had lived in her home for 14 years. She had lived through 2 previous fire seasons without evacuating and viewed the alerts as overly broad. When the evacuation notice sounded and a county deputy knocked, she answered with visible irritation. She questioned whether the order applied specifically to her address and pointed toward the hills, noting that the smoke did not appear to be moving in her direction. She referenced her property taxes while challenging the necessity of leaving. The deputy repeated that the order was mandatory and conditions could shift quickly with the wind. Patricia indicated she would remain and manage the situation herself. The deputy documented her refusal and moved on to the next house. Patricia spent the next 2 hours managing the situation on her own terms. She packed a small bag with documents and her laptop, placing it near the front door as if to demonstrate she was prepared. She ran a garden hose along the east side of the house in an attempt to wet the lawn and siding. She called her sister in Sacramento and described the situation in controlled, measured terms. Her sister urged her to leave. Patricia said the wind had shifted and the smoke looked farther away. Despite that, conditions remained volatile. Late that morning, wind gusts of 45 to 60 miles per hour drove the fire line more than a mile in under 30 minutes. Embers carried well ahead of the primary front ignited spot fires on rooftops and dry grass lots throughout the neighborhood. One ember lodged in an attic vent 2 houses down. Another caught her backyard fence. Patricia called 911 minutes later and reported that a structure across the street was burning. The dispatcher told her to leave immediately. Fire units were occupied with multiple structures. She moved toward the garage where her car was parked. The electric opener was dead, likely due to a power outage in the area. The smoke thickened rapidly inside the garage, reducing visibility to only a few feet. She reached for the manual release, but the air had already grown intensely hot and difficult to breathe. She became disoriented within minutes and collapsed near the doorway. She was found by firefighters inside the garage doorway during a secondary search after the main fire front had passed through the neighborhood. She was transported by ambulance to the hospital and pronounced dead later that afternoon. The medical examiner listed the cause of death as smoke inhalation with thermal injuries. In the months that followed, authorities expanded early evacuation messaging and increased door-to-door notification efforts in high-risk wind events. It was June 11th, 2018, in Scottsdale, Arizona. A heat advisory had been issued across the valley, and one of the city's most exclusive thermal spas was operating at capacity, its staff working carefully through a busy afternoon. Renata Voss, 44, a regional operations manager for a luxury retail chain, considered herself someone who did not need to be told how to use her own body. She had been a member at the spa for 2 years and had developed a reputation among the staff as a difficult guest, not hostile exactly, but dismissive in a way that made routine safety reminders feel like confrontations. She regularly exceeded the posted sauna limits, declined water when it was offered, and had on at least 2 previous visits been asked to observe the cool-down protocol before approaching the plunge pool. Staff recognized her when she arrived that afternoon and noted privately that she seemed more irritable than usual. What the staff did not know, and what Renata had not disclosed, was that she had been treating severe high blood pressure for 2 years, but had recently stopped taking her medication without consulting her doctor. She told a close friend the prescription made her feel sluggish, and that she planned to manage the condition through lifestyle changes instead. In the weeks that followed, her blood pressure rose back into the dangerous range her physician had previously warned her about. She never scheduled a follow-up appointment. She also mentioned a lingering 2-day headache and a heavy pressure behind her eyes, dismissing both as stress from work. The spa prides itself on its strict safety protocols, a 15-minute sauna limit, mandatory hydration breaks, and a strictly enforced prohibition on moving directly between extreme heat and cold without a cool-down period. These rules were standard policy, observed on every operating day, regardless of conditions outside. At 2:15 p.m., Renata entered the cedar sauna on the facility's upper level. The room was running at approximately 190 degrees Fahrenheit, well within the facility's operating range, but demanding even for guests in good health. A staff member checked on her at the 15-minute mark and reminded her that her session time had elapsed. She told the attendant she had been coming there for 2 years and did not need to be timed like a beginner, adding that she paid premium membership fees and expected to be treated accordingly. The staff member noted that her face was deeply flushed and that she had not touched the water bottle she had been given at the front desk. A second staff member returned 10 minutes later and made a more direct request, explaining that the limit existed for physiological reasons and was not a matter of preference. Renata gathered her things slowly, made a remark about being monitored like a child, and walked out into the corridor flushed and moving with an unsteadiness she did not acknowledge. She paused once in the corridor, one hand briefly against the wall, before continuing forward. She had been in the sauna for just over 25 minutes. Rather than moving to the designated cool-down area, she walked directly to the plunge pool at the far end of the corridor. A staff member called after her. She rounded on him and, in a sharp, dismissive gesture, kicked the rubber safety wedge from beside the pool entry. It skidded across the wet tile. Her momentum carried her forward. With the wedge displaced and the tile slick beneath her feet, she lost her balance and went over the edge into the 50-degree water. What followed was not instantaneous. The sudden immersion triggered an involuntary gasp and a sharp constriction of blood vessels, placing additional strain on a cardiovascular system that had already been under stress for more than half an hour. Witnesses later reported that she emitted a strained guttural sound and briefly brought a hand toward her temple before her grip loosened. Her body slackened and she slipped beneath the surface without attempting to resurface. Staff reached her within moments and pulled her from the pool. Paramedics arrived a few minutes after the emergency call was placed and transported her to a medical center. Renata Voss was pronounced dead at 4:02 p.m. The medical examiner determined the cause of death as intracerebral hemorrhage with hypertensive cardiovascular disease and acute thermal stress, listed as significant contributing factors. Immediately following the incident, local health authorities ordered the spa to suspend operations pending a formal investigation. The facility was temporarily shut down while inspectors reviewed safety logs, staff training records, surveillance footage, and emergency response procedures. Thanks for watching. If you like these stories, click here.